Hey everyone, welcome or welcome back to Just One More Row, my little crafting vlog we got going on here. Last week we went ahead and talked about how to estimate meterage based on the number of skeins of yarn if you're doing yarn substitutions, and this week I want to talk to you about swatching. What is a gauge swatch? You may also hear tension swatch. A tension swatch and a gauge swatch are the same thing. They are a sample of your fabric made with your stitch pattern, and they are done using a specific number of stitches over a specific distance. So what's that actually mean? All right, for a little bit of context, whenever you have an item, it will have a finished dimension. So you're making a doll, and you have a designer who has said the goal of this is to make a doll that is 12 inches tall. And if you would like your doll to be 12 inches tall, you need to make it with this many stitches per inch and this many rows per 1 inch. The same thing if you have a blanket or a shawl. If you would like it to be this finished size, say, 50 inches wide, you will need to have this many stitches per 1 inch and this many rows per 1 inch. If you have a garment, it's the same thing. Whether you're doing crochet, whether you're doing knitting, it's the same principle. And a gauge swatch or a tension swatch is you using a yarn, perhaps the yarn that is recommended and perhaps it's a substitution yarn, along with the recommended needles. Well, start with the recommended needles in order to see if you can get that same gauge. In modern patterns, almost all of them will have your gauge or tension. Start with the designers, what they recommend. Use a yarn. Try to use a yarn that's close to what they're recommending. And I recommend start with the needle size that is given within the pattern. That needle size, I tend to treat always as a recommendation. It is a place to start, but you may knit or crochet loosely or tightly. Okay, I knit very loosely, so I need to use smaller needles to get a gauge swatch that is the correct size. Conversely, I crochet tightly, so I actually have to use a larger crochet hook than what they recommend in order to get the correct gauge. And that's part of this, is that you're going to start by casting on the number of recommended stitches. If it doesn't have a tension listed, which can happen in vintage or historic patterns, that is the most common thing that I see missing. What you're going to do is cast on at least 2 or 3 repeats of the pattern, and then you're going to work at least 1 repetition of the whole pattern. In color work, I do it so that I do each of these at least once. In crocheting, you're going to, because some of those stitch patterns can be very, very short. If it's a 4-row stitch pattern like it is in the Grecian blouse that I'm working on, you go ahead and just try for like 2 or 3 inches, probably closer to 4 if you can do it. But once you finish that, then you're going to take your piece. If it's on a set of knitting needles, take it off the needles, but lay it out flat. Do your best not to stretch anything, and measure from there. Take the total number of stitches, divide by the number of inches that you got, and that should give you your stitches per inch. And you want to get you're doing your best to get as close as you can to what is within the pattern instructions. 28 stitches per inch is not the same thing as 29 stitches per inch or 30 stitches per inch. It's not the same thing as 27 stitches an inch. You want to try to get as close as possible. Let's say that you have a piece that is 100 stitches wide. You're making something for a sweater back, and it is 100 stitches wide. If you work that up at 5 stitches an inch, that back piece will be 20 inches wide. If you do it at 4 stitches an inch, that back now becomes 25 inches wide. If you do it at 6 stitches an inch, it's 16.6 inches wide. So that extra stitch makes a huge amount of difference. And you need to take that into account. So go ahead and do your swatch. Also, if you get in there and then you realize that the yarn's not going to work, it's better to figure that out in a swatch. If you get in and you realize that you hate the way the pattern actually looks, better to figure that out now. If you get in there and realize that this is going to be way too much of a time commitment, you hate the way it looks, you don't like the color, or maybe you love the stitch but the color you've chosen is just not okay, figure that out in a swatch. You want to figure it out then, not after you've committed the time and the money and the effort, and you may not be able to take that yarn back. Just my little 2 cents on that. That's the next step in my process. Figured I'd share it with you. So I'll see you guys next week. Have fun. Make stuff.